Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and welcome back to my channel. Today is the very first episode of Python for DevOps engineers, and in this video we will learn about some really interesting topics such as why Python is used by DevOps engineers. Then we will understand the differences between shell scripting and Python scripting. After that, we will learn some real-time use cases of Python by DevOps engineers. Finally, I'll teach you how to install Python and run your very first Python program. Whether you're on Windows, Linux, or macOS, I'll share some useful tips so that you will be able to run your first Python program in just a couple of minutes. So please watch this video till the end. Okay, now before going into today's video and deep diving into that particular topic, let me tell you that this is a GitHub repository that I am going to use throughout this series. That is right from day 1 to day 19, whatever notes that I want to share with you people, the programs that I'm going to write, interview questions, everything will be uploaded to this GitHub repository. Not just during this series, let's say after 6 months, 3 months, I want to update few things so that it is useful for you people. I will update in the same GitHub repository. So just start this GitHub repository so that you will get updates as I make some changes to this repository. Along with that, there is also a README file. And in the README file, you have the complete course content. That is the complete course syllabus. Right from day 1 to day 19, what we are going to cover, in which order we are going to cover, everything is available. Right? So please start this repository so that you get the information. Okay, now going back and understanding the topic for today, that is why Python, right? I'm pretty sure most of you have this question, right? That Abhishek, as a DevOps engineer, why should I learn Python? So this question also comes from shell scripting versus Python, right? Probably this also leads to this question. Now, I understand that many people have this concern. That is because you have already learned shell, or you are confused. Should you start with shell scripting or should you start with Python scripting? Which is more important than the other? If I have to only learn one thing, should I learn shell or Python? All of these questions I will answer in a very simple way. So instead of just giving you one liner, let me explain from the basics, right? So why shell scripting is very commonly used by DevOps engineers. So usually as a DevOps engineer, you deal with Linux systems. Okay. That is most of the machines that we use, or the most of the machines that we use to deploy the software, the applications, right? It is on the Linux machines because Linux is much safer when compared to Windows servers, and they are very less vulnerability prone as well. So that's why people prefer Linux, and most of the applications are deployed on the Linux servers. And because we are concerned with the deployments, because we are the team who provides the infrastructure, so on a day-to-day basis we deal with a lot of Linux machines. And unlike Windows machines or your Mac OS machines, which have a rich user interface, right? That means today I'm explaining this video on my Mac OS machine, and I am writing things here, I am drawing things here, I have opened the browser and I'm showing this content to you, right? This is all possible because this has a very rich user interface, the laptop that I'm using or the operating system that I've installed on the server. Whereas if you talk about the Linux systems, right? Let's say you have created an EC2 instance, or you have created a virtual machine on the Azure platform. By default, by default, they do not come with a graphical user interface. They don't come up with a GUI. So that's why to interact with these Linux machines, it can be to creating a file or opening browser and reading the content. That is, if you want to access any website and read the information on the website, or creating some folders, right? Learning about the free disk space on the Linux system, or the memory that is left on the Linux system, or the number of CPUs that are available on the Linux systems. So any day-to-day task you want to perform on this Linux system, right? So you need to learn shell commands, right? Why you need to learn shell commands? Because to interact with this Linux systems, what you do is you SSH to those machines. SSH is a protocol through which you can connect from your personal machine to this Linux system. It can be EC2 instance, VM on Azure or Google Cloud, anything. So you SSH to those instances and run the shell commands. Now, what is the difference between shell commands and shell scripting? It's very simple. If I have to put this in a very, very blunt way, that is, if I have to put this in a very, very simple way, if you create a file, okay, and provide the extension of the file as .sh, instead of providing the extension as .txt, usually for the text files, we have .txt. Instead of that, if you provide the extension of this file as .sh, that is, you create this file with name test.sh or abc.sh or something. And inside this file, if you just write bunch of shell commands in order, that is line number 1, line number 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you write 5 shell commands and using this command called /test.sh, if you execute this file, all the commands will be executed in the serial order. That means, let's say someone tells you that Abhishek, log into a Linux machine, SSH to a machine, then create a file in the machine, then create a folder in it, then try to get the free disk space, try to get the free memory, try to get the free CPUs that are available in the machine. Now, instead of running 5 commands and reading the output one after the other, you can put all that 5 shell commands in a file, and you can just execute the file using this command, and it will print the output on the terminal, right? So this is about shell scripting. That's it. So the primary purpose of using shell scripting, watch it very carefully when I'm talking. I'm saying that this is the primary purpose. I'm not saying this is the only purpose, but the primary purpose of shell scripting by DevOps engineers is to interact with Linux systems and to get some information from these Linux systems, or to manage these Linux systems, or to get some system related information from these Linux systems. You use shell scripting or shell commands. Now, if you are able to do all of these things, then why would you need Python, right? So for that, I'll give you 2 fundamental reasons. Okay. One reason, second reason is very important, but the first reason is that I told you that as a DevOps engineer, most of the things that we interact with is Linux systems. But I told you most of the systems. I did not tell you all of the systems that we interact. So there can be some instances that is Windows as well. Okay. So if you are writing scripts on Linux machines only, or if you are writing shell scripting, let's say the task that is given to you is to get some information both from Linux systems and Windows machines, then your shell scripting would not work. So, shell is only restricted to Linux, whereas Python can work on both Linux and Windows. Now, you might say that if you are a DevOps engineer, you might say that, but Abhishek, I have Ansible for that, right? Why would I need both shell scripting and Python? I can simply learn Ansible, which works on both of these things. The foundation of Ansible is also Python. That is, Ansible is written in Python. Now, it is because many people don't know Python, so they can simply learn a templating language. I will call Ansible as just a templating language because it's a YAML scripting, right? So using Ansible, you can run things both on Linux and Python. That's why I said this is only one reason, and this is not the most important reason. The most important reason is that when you want to perform some complex tasks, okay, when you want to write some complex programs, you want to interact with APIs. I'll tell you use cases, don't worry. why you interact with APIs or why you write complex programs, I'll explain in a minute. But when you want to write complex programs, when you want to interact with the APIs, when you want to perform more of data manipulation, okay, so in such use cases, Python wins over shell scripting. Okay, so if you ask me, these things cannot be done using shell scripting, you can definitely do it. Okay, these days you can achieve things with any programming language or scripting language, but Python is designed to perform these activities in a very simpler way. Okay, so two reasons that I've explained. One reason is shell scripting is only designed for Linux systems, but Python can work both on Linux systems and Windows machines. But this is not the only reason, or this is not the important reason, because as a DevOps engineer, you can avoid Python using Ansible if you want to run some system related tasks, or if you want to fetch some information both from Windows and Linux. Instead of Python, you can also use Ansible. But the main reason here is that when you want to write some complex programs, that is from the scripting point of view, or when you want to interact with the APIs, or when you want to perform data manipulation, in such cases, you will use Python. Now, let me explain this, right? So here, Abhishek, you said APIs, you said complex tasks, you said data manipulation, but I don't understand what you're talking about. Don't worry. Let's say that there is a very simple task, that is, you see this GitHub repository, right? So as a DevOps engineer, let's say you have some 20-30 repositories, and now your task is to talk to this GitHub repository and list out all the issues that are created on this GitHub repository and who has created this issue. Okay, for example, there is this issue. Now who has created this issue? So this is your task. So you are asked to talk to the API of a GitHub repository, right? API of GitHub, and talk to the API that gives you issues on this GitHub repository, and you have to get the author name from it. Got it? So you have to make a API call to GitHub, GitHub api.github.com/issues something. And using this API call, you need to get the list of issues. So what happens when you make an API call? GitHub will give you a JSON payload. Okay, so it will give you a JSON payload. That is, it will give you a very big syntax, and from that you want to fetch the author name. Now you can do this using shell scripting as well as Python scripting, but the modules of Python are rich. Okay, and Python is designed to handle these kind of scenarios in a very simple way. So if you are using shell scripting, you would use curl. Okay, curl is a shell command to talk to the API of GitHub, and then you would use probably JQ to parse the JSON object that GitHub has given to you, and you would get the required information, right? You can finally get the author details using shell scripting as well. But if you are using Python, because Python has a JSON module, you can serialize this object, and it can be a complex JSON object. It can be 1,000 lines, 10,000 lines, or it can be a nested JSON object. Using Python, you can easily iterate through the JSON object. Basically, you serialize this, you convert this into a dictionary. You will understand going ahead. I'm just explaining on a very high level, right? We have all of these topics covered, don't worry. And you will iterate through this dictionary and get information in like couple of lines in Python. That is very, very simple. You can do it through shell scripting as well, but shell scripting does not have rich modules as Python has, right? So I'll again explain you this in just one line so that you will understand this in a better way. So basically, the task that is given to you is, instead of going through each and every repository, that is, if you want to get the issues in this repository, what you need to do, you have to log into GitHub account. After that, you have to go to this repository. Then you have to go to issues. Then you have to manually open each and every issue and see who has created this issue, right? Let's say these are the steps that you have. Now, instead of doing this manually, you can automate this as a DevOps engineer, because you might have 20 repositories, 30 repositories. So your goal would be to write a script, Right now, let's say I'm not saying shell script or Python script, but your goal is to write a script. That script should talk to the API of GitHub, because whenever you are automating things, you will either talk to API or CLI, right? So you will talk to the API of GitHub to fetch the issues. So GitHub will give you back this information. So when you ask about the issues, what GitHub will do is it will give the entire list of issues in the JSON format. So now you have received the JSON object. From this JSON object, you have to fetch in your script. What you need to do is you have to fetch the author details. Perfect. So step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4. You can do this using shell scripting as well as Python scripting, right? Now, if you do this using shell scripting, the problem is that for shell script, first to interact with this API, you would use a curl command, and then GitHub would return you a JSON. So to parse the JSON, of course, in shell scripting, you have a module called JQ, but these modules are not as robust, or they are not as rich as the Python modules. So in Python, what you would do is, again, in Python also you have some modules, like you would use the request module, and then you would use the JSON module. Or what you can also do is you can serialize this content in Python, and using serialization, you can convert that into a uh, data type called dictionaries, and from there you can easily fetch the content. Okay, so if you are doing any complex activities like this, you should choose Python. Whereas if you are doing some system related activities, that is, if you want to fetch information of bunch of systems, or if you want to do some activities on that system, create files, folders, or get information such as free disk on that system, or mount a volume onto that system, or you want to detach a volume, you want to perform any of this monitoring related tasks, then go with shell scripting, right? Advanced concepts, advanced topics, go with Python scripting, right? I hope this is clear, and I have explained this in this particular file as well, that is shell versus Python, where what I have explained here, when use shell scripting, if you want to perform any system administration task, or if you want to perform any text processing, that is, you get list of files, you get log files, right? You have a very big log file, and from the log file you want to get number of error messages. From the log file you want to get number of info messages, warning messages. In such cases, you can simply use shell scripting. Or you want to create any environment variables, or you want to get information from any environment variables. These are very simple tasks, so go with shell scripting. When use Python, when you want to write any complex logics, or when you have cross-platform compatibility, that is, you might have Linux machines, Windows machines, or when you want to talk to the APIs, example I just gave you, or you want to do some error handling, that is, when you are writing the Python scripts, you have an option for handling the errors. We will talk about it later. And finally, some advanced data processing, which again kind of things that I've explained. If you want a JSON object, and if you want to address, or in other fields where you want to talk to the CSVs, or you want to use large amount of data sets, you want to train it. In such cases also, Python is much preferred over shell scripting, but it is not from DevOps engineer point of view. From DevOps engineer point of view, bluntly saying, simple task, go with shell scripting. Advanced or complex tasks, go with Python scripting. And what comes in the advanced or Python advanced topics, or what comes in the complex scripting, talking to the APIs, right? Or performing operations on the nested JSON objects, talking to third-party applications, right? Whether you want to write serverless applications, that is Lambda functions on AWS, where you want to interact with another AWS resources. When you want to interact with another AWS resources, that itself means, like, let's say using Lambda function, you want to talk to S3 bucket. Basically, you're talking to S3 API, right? So more or less the API related activities, we will use Python scripting, right? I hope this point is very, very clear to each and every one of you. And if you still have any questions, do let me know in the comment section. I'll definitely reply. Now, after this, what is the next thing that we are going to learn is how to install Python and run your very first Python program. Now, you might think that this is very, very simple, Abhishek. I can simply install Python, but many times what I have noticed is there are a lot of students who want to do this, or people don't have their personal laptops. They're using your office laptops and they cannot install Python. Or when they're using AWS account or Azure account, sometimes their account is suspended, blocked due to some payment issues. So there is a very, very simple technique that I'm going to tell you. That is, go to the GitHub repository. You can go to this GitHub repository or any GitHub repository. If you are following this series, you will definitely fork this GitHub repository, right? Because you want to use the files in it. Or let's say you have created your own GitHub repository. Anything is fine. There is something that is offered by GitHub, which is called as code spaces, right? So just click on this plus button. And what you will do is GitHub will give you an instance. So this is again a very simple instance that you get from Amazon or you get from Azure, whatever it is, right? It's kind of a similar instance. But here, what Codespaces does is it abstracts everything from you. That is, it does not provide any information. It will just ask you, tell me about the instance that you want. That is, how much resources you want. It will only ask you about CPU and RAM because I have already created. It is not asking me for that information because I have already created the code space, right? And in this environment, once you tell that, go with 2 CPU, 2 GB RAM, that is more than enough for Python. And this instance will be provided for you for 60 hours. Now, 60 hours is a huge time because as I close this particular thing, that means GitHub is not counting the usage of mine, right? And let's say your 60 hours is done, you can use another GitHub account. Or, if you don't have any issues with the machine that you are using, that is on your Windows machine or Linux machine, you don't have any problem, then you can use that itself. But going back to code spaces, so it will give you 60 hours of free resource. You can use this instance for 60 hours per month. And next month you can again use for 60 hours. And if you have multiple GitHub accounts, then you can use 60 plus 60 plus 60, whatever it is, right? And the advantage here is that you don't have to bother about the installation at all, right? You will get a terminal and just let me increase the font. Okay, just type Python here, hyphen version, and you will notice that Python is already installed on this machine, right? So if you just go to the Day-1 folder and just run Python space Day-1, I need to switch to the folder, right? Day-1 followed by 02 hyphen hello world.py, you will notice that the program is already executed. So my Python is installed and the program is also executed. And how much time did it take? Just a couple of minutes. So use this if you have any issues with your account being suspended, your account being blocked, or any particular thing. Now, let's say for some reason you don't want to use code spaces. Then what you need to do, so just take a new tab and search for Python downloads. Don't go with any other website, just go with the official Python website, that is download Python. So this is the page that you would see. And inside this page, there is a button called downloads. Click on that. And depending upon your operating system, just choose it. Let's say Windows. So click on the Windows button. And here you have different versions of Python. Go with the latest version. There is no problem. Or go with Python 3.10 as well. In fact, you can install any version because the scripts that I'm going to explain will work on any Python version. And now you have to be very careful about your system type. Most of the Windows machines use 64-bit processor, but you can go to the about section and see what exactly your machine is. So mostly it is 64-bit machines which we use, and click on this particular thing. So you will download that thing, right? And extract the zip, click on the next button, your Python is installed. And Python is also set to path so that what you can do is if you are on a Windows machine, open Git Bash. If you don't have Git Bash, open command prompt. But I will highly recommend you to use Git Bash or MOBA Xterm, right? So let's say you don't want to use MOBA Xterm, Putty or any other thing, just install Git Bash. Okay. So Git Bash will come up with a will come with a terminal. You can use that. Mostly issue is with people who have Windows, because on Linux and Mac OS, you can just install using the command line as well. If you have Mac OS, you can just run the command called brew space install space Python or Python 3, and your installation will be successful. There will not be any issues. But with Windows, people have some concerns. That is, Python is not set to path, or I'm not finding the right distribution, all of these things. So go with these steps. If you're finding it difficult for some reason, the path variable is not set, or for some reason, you are not able to install on your machine, you have office laptop restrictions. In such cases, you can use code spaces. Code spaces is just a couple of minutes. You will able to run it. And mostly for this course, I will use code spaces. And code spaces is a Visual Studio thing, right? So here, this comes with a Visual Studio code. So I will explain the entire thing here. If you are using your personal laptop, then install Visual Studio Code on that particular laptop, right? It's very simple again. Just go to your browser, search for Visual Studio Code. And in next classes, I will explain you what plugins to install, what extensions to install in the Visual Studio Code. But for today, just have your Python set up as I've shown in the video and execute your very first Python program. So this is the assignment for today. Nothing more than this. It's very, very simple. So I hope you will all be able to complete this, and you can revise the complete material that is available in the Day 1 folder. Thank you so much. See you all in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.